Hi. In the first part of the series, we looked at setting up XAMPP for Windows in order to create a web development environment that will allow us to create databases, run PHP, and a web server locally on our computer. This environment is necessary in order to install WordPress and to have it run locally on our machine. In case we don't have access to a remote web server, this technique is pretty handy for local development and allows you to run and play with a local version of WordPress on your machine. The principles we're going to be looking at here apply to the server as well. So if you do have access to a web server, these skills will carry over and the techniques and steps are pretty much the same. To begin, ensure that you have XAMPP installed on your computer and make sure it's up and running as seen in part 1 in this series. And to access your XAMPP front end, the address is localhost. By default, it will load the XAMPP folder to get you up and running quickly. And what we're going to be looking at specifically in this tutorial is how to set up a database properly so that WordPress can install easily on our local workstation. The tool we're going to be using to do that is called PHP MyAdmin. Now, PHP MyAdmin is just a fancy front end for running database queries. Normally you would do that through a command prompt and use the SQL language to set up your query, and it would interact with the database server and you could perform all sorts of functions. To make it easier for users who are just beginning in this thing and make it less tedious if you're not familiar with the language, it also helps to have a nice visual of what your database looks like and access specific tables and data in it in a much easier way. So, as you may have noticed, the link is down here, PHP MyAdmin on your XAMPP window. Click to access it. It automatically loads the front end. Just a quick review here. On the left, we have all the databases that are currently configured on the system. And here on the right-hand side are a series of, well, each page has some information. We have our navigation up here that allows us to access various functions that we can perform on the database. To create a new database, we make sure to click on the databases menu item over here. We're going to create a new database called WordPress and 55 just to kind of randomize it and make sure there aren't any conflicts with existing databases, and if we want to create more WordPress installations in the future. Collation is pretty good. We can pretty much go with the defaults here and create. So database WordPress 55 has been created. The next thing we want to do is we want to create a user that will be allowed to access this database. That's going to be required information during the WordPress installation, so make sure to take note of all these settings that we're setting up right now. In the users, we have a list of existing users over here. And what we're going to do is create a new user specifically for this WordPress installation. We can click on the Add User link over here. And of course, we fill in the blanks. AP user. The host in this case is going to be localhost, because that's how our server refers to itself in our local development environment. And frequently that's the same thing that's used on remote servers as well. Password, pick something fun and easy to remember but relatively secure. In this case, Make sure you write this down because this is going to be required during the WordPress installation coming up later on. And of course, we want to assign privileges to this user that will allow them to perform a variety of functions on this particular database. For security reasons, you can, different users can have different access to different tables. In this case, what we want to do is grant all privileges to this particular user. So click check all to make sure that WordPress has access to all the functions that it needs in order to work properly. Once all that's set up, make sure you click on Go, and a new user has been added. You can verify this by looking at the list, and there it is, WP user on localhost with a password, all privileges, good to go. And that's how you set up a database for WordPress installation. Now, if we want to explore that database, we can access it from here on the left. We can expand it, and normally there would be tables underneath. In this case, because it's new and empty, there's not much to see here. So even if we click over here and we browse, there's really not much to do. We can perform a whole bunch of other functions on this particular database using PHP MyAdmin. We can create tables, we can import data, export existing data, but for now we have the information we need to install WordPress. Let's proceed with that and see what the steps required are. Our first order of business for WordPress is to make sure we have the latest version. Let's download it, free download. Go to wordpress.org and click the download button right here in order to get a local copy. Download, and off it goes. It's only a few megs. And once the download finishes, you should have a copy saved locally on your computer. I saved it to my desktop. In your situation, it might be in a different folder, possibly downloads. Make sure you know where it ended up because you need to access it. The next thing we're going to do is unzip the files here. And we're going to unzip it to this folder. And that's that. The next thing we want to do is actually set it up within our XAMPP environment so that we can start the installation process. To do that, you have to open up your XAMPP folder. Oh, here we go. So make sure you know where your XAMPP installation folder is. And as mentioned in the previous video that accompanies this one, your websites all reside in the htdocs folder. So double click there, and what we're going to do here is create a new folder. And we're going to call this WordPress. Let's open that up. The next thing we need to do is find where we unzipped our folder. Hold on. So this is the zip file. This is the files that were extracted. What we want to do is grab all the files in the WordPress folder that we extracted. Make sure you grab them all. Control A should do it. And make sure you copy them over to the WordPress folder that was created in htdocs in your XAMPP installation. So that's done. What we can do now is return to our local host and enter WordPress, which is the folder we created in our installation, in our XAMPP folder. And believe it or not, this is it. We're starting the installation process for WordPress. So let's walk through that process now. Let's create a configuration file. And we're told that we'll need a database name, a username, and a password. That's what we created using PHP MyAdmin, and hopefully we've taken note of that so that we can enter this data into our configuration. Let's go, as WordPress says. So our database name should be WordPress 55. If you neglected to write this down and don't remember it, you can easily see it again by going to PHP MyAdmin and checking here to see what the database name is. For the username, we created a user called WP user. Our password, in my case, is WP user, which is pretty insecure and not recommended, but for the purposes of this tutorial, it'll do fine. And our database host is localhost. The table prefix is what all the tables created by WordPress will use as a prefix in order to distinguish them from any existing tables that might be in that particular database. In this case, there shouldn't be any conflicts because we know that that database is empty. So let's click submit and see what happens. All right. So what this means when you see this screen is that the database information was properly entered and WordPress has actually communicated with the MySQL server to have a successful connection. So now WordPress and MySQL are talking to each other, and that's a good start right there. Let's run the install. But before we do that, let's see what happens if I accidentally make an error with this configuration. Now in the case that somewhere along the way I screwed up, I put the wrong information in, let's see what happens. You'll see this error, and it's pretty self-explanatory. Make sure you're using the correct username and password, make sure you type the correct host name, and you make sure the database server is running. If we can access PHP MyAdmin, the chances are that yes, it's running. If not, please start from the beginning. Check your XAMPP settings, make sure everything's up and running. Double check your database name. If you click on users, you can double check the username, and failing that, you can edit, you can change the password on this user by clicking the table in the user section for this particular user. So let's go back and try again with the proper information. And good, that's the message really that we're going for. If not, go back, double check your settings. It shouldn't be too difficult to find out where the point of failure is. Let's run the install, and that's it. Let's give the site a title. We'll call it My WordPress Site. Give yourself a username, something you'll remember, and a password. We'll call it, and of course it's a very weak password, usually not recommended for WordPress installations, but this is a local installation, so it shouldn't be too bad. Give yourself an email address where system messages can be sent, and well, allow search engines to index the site. That's up to you to decide. So install WordPress. It does its thing, it's communicating with the database. It all happens fairly quickly, and hopefully you get the success message. If somewhere along the way there's failure and you don't get the success message, there's a possibility that there's a connectivity issue or a setting that changed during the installation. If you made it this far, usually you're pretty much home free. The next thing to do is log in, and guess what? WordPress has been installed and you're up and running. Once you log in, you have access to your dashboard, and of course your WordPress site is now running locally on your computer. Congratulations, you've installed WordPress.